Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tianlu. Coming up in this edition. Venezuela asks 7 of its neighbors, including Argentina and Chile, to withdraw diplomatic staff for alleged interference in its internal affairs. The Gaza ceasefire and hostage release negotiations have made little progress, with Israel and Hamas trading blame in the latest talks. And activists in Japan protest against the U.S. Japan 2+2 meeting and Quad meeting in Tokyo. We begin in South America. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has vowed to punish violent offenders who took to the streets to protest the official ballot count. On Monday, the National Electoral Council declared the incumbent leader the winner of Sunday's presidential election. But opposition groups have cast doubts over the government's narrative. Meantime, Venezuela has told 7 of its neighbors, including Argentina and Chile, to withdraw diplomatic staff for alleged interference in its internal affairs. Stephen Gibbs reports from Caracas.
It sort of broke out onto the streets, to be quite honest, here in Caracas and in many cities around Venezuela. There were quite serious protests, several thousand people on the street here in Caracas. We haven't seen that for a few years here, and they were broadly protesting against the result. There was quite a lot of vandalism too, and President Maduro said that those caught will be severely prosecuted. But it all goes back to this disputed count. The opposition releasing its rival count to that result. And needless to say, its result is quite different than the official one, particularly in the crucial thing of who won. It says that Edmundo Gonzalez, this former diplomat, won by pretty much a landslide. The government of President Maduro strongly disputes that. It says its result is the official and final one. But it's under quite a lot of pressure to give specific details of the breakdown of that result by polling station, because that's actually what the opposition has done. And the test really is whether the results the opposition say they have, the individual bits of paper from each polling station, match what was counted and what was released by the official counting authority. So just after this controversial result was announced, there were 7 mainly conservative Latin American governments that said, look, we are going to hold back on recognizing this result and recognizing, therefore, President Maduro as the future president for a 3rd mandate of Venezuela until we have better breakdown of the results, because that is what has been questioned. The Venezuelan government's reaction to that joint letter was to expel diplomats from all of those countries. And then those countries, in turn, have expelled Venezuelan diplomats. So any idea of a sort of South American unity about this seems to be breaking down. There are big divisions here. There are plenty of countries that are backing the Venezuelan government, but there are quite a few that are saying the same thing. Just release those official results, and then we can see where we go from there.
Now, Stephen Gibbs reporting. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan Transport Ministry says it will suspend commercial flights between Panama and Dominica starting from Wednesday. The move aims to condemn external influences over its internal affairs. In the Middle East, the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release negotiations have made little progress. Israel and Hamas are blaming for each other in the latest talks under international mediation. Hamas has accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of adding new conditions to a truce proposal. Netanyahu has denied making any changes. Meanwhile, Israeli fighter jets have hit over 30 targets across Gaza, exacerbating the plight of displaced Palestinians in Khan Yunis. Akram Al-Satari has more.
The Israeli occupation forces have been communicating with the population in eastern Khan Yunis, southeast and southwest Khan Yunis, and we're asking them to head to the humanitarian area. They have also been communicating with people in Al Burej and Al Maghazi and almost all the central Gaza area, and they were asking also to move into Al Mawasi area. That poses a very big question. Where are people going, and will the area that they have been asked to move to be able to accommodate that extremely large number of people who are heading there? while people are starting to flee. Some of the people are still trapped in the areas they are staying in because they didn't have enough time to find a transportation to the area that they were asked to move by the Israeli occupation forces. And in the meantime, the bombardment is extremely heavy in the areas of central Gaza where the Israeli occupation forces asked the people to move, and in the areas of East Khan Yunis where around 11 to 13 people were reported to be killed. So the bombardment is still continuous, and the destruction of the whole residential blocks is still underway, while the ground operations are expanded in Gaza central area and in Khan Yunis, while the humanitarian area that was prescribed as Israel by a humanitarian area is still targeted and reduced by the Israeli occupation. Some of the UN were voicing their major concerns about the incident that took place where the Israeli forces blown up a water reservoir in Rafah area, resulting of depriving a whole population in Rafah from the water that used to be pumped to them and the minimum water that was reaching them. Now Rafah missed that very important resource, and the mayor of Rafah said that this is going to affect tens of thousands of people.
That was Akram Al-Satari reporting from Khan Yunis. Staying in the Middle East, fears of escalating violence between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon have lingered. Israel has promised not to take retaliatory actions after a rocket strike killed 12 children and teenagers in the Golan Heights. Hezbollah has denied any connection with the incident. Israeli officials say they want to avoid dragging the region into all-out war. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
Israel vowed to retaliate and retaliate forcefully. It has not happened yet, but that special cabinet meeting convened exactly for that, to try and see how harsh will be the Israeli response. Israel is in sort of a trouble here. On the one hand, it wants to react and wants to retaliate strongly towards that event. 12 children were killed there in Majid al-Shams. On the other hand, Israel does not want this to become an all-out war, since the army is still preoccupied mostly with the war in the southern border in Gaza. That's still the number one priority for the Israeli army. Therefore, Israel now has to find a way, on one hand, to react forcefully, on the other hand, not to drag the entire region into an all-out war. Israel vowed to react. There could be a reaction to Israel's reaction, and then you can never really know where that goes. Israel will react, Hezbollah will react to the reaction, and then no one really knows where this will head.
Now it's Jonathan Regev reporting on Israel-Hezbollah tension. Then we turn to Europe. The new Labour-led British government has revealed that public finances face a deficit of £22 billion. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is warning of difficult decisions ahead to cut spending or increase taxes. Jane Copestake has more from London.
The finance minister indicated that this was the worst set of economic circumstances that the country has faced since the Second World War. The Conservative government, the former Conservative Party, immediately rebutted this claim, saying it was actually a shameless attempt for the government to lay the ground for tax rises that would come that they were not previously open about in their campaigning to win the general election. But Rachel Reeves, the finance minister, said it was indeed a cover-up from the opposition in the House of this scale of the whole of $28 billion. So the areas that she outlined that they had not realized the true extent of the crisis were several. They include the asylum system. She said the previous government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda was a significant part of a projected overspend in that area of $8.2 billion. She said rail services and rail use during the pandemic had an influence on the previous government, who had used cash to give rail companies without budgeting properly, taking into account the scales also of industrial action that has been taking place. That led to an overspend of $2 billion. But she said also, she didn't disclose the amount, but that there was an overspend in the amount of money pledged to the crisis in Ukraine. And she said there was, at the moment, not enough money to cover the cost, but that was something that they were willing to honour. These commitments, they will honour them in full. So she said it's going to take them some time to evaluate still before the budget that will be announced on October 30th. But she said it was impossible for this government not to act immediately given the scale of this problem. She said there were many difficult choices that were approaching her on this, spending what she's going to do to plug that hole. The big plan there that has been scrapped is millions of pensioners now are not going to receive a winter fuel payment. That's around $400 a year. She said these are now going to be means tested, which will hopefully save £1.4 billion That's seen as a surprise move. Another piece of big news that we heard was a deal that they're hoping to strike with the junior doctors. We've been covering this a lot. So the junior doctors have been asking for a 35% pay rise. The government is offering a 22% pay rise, and that will be voted on very soon by the union for the junior doctors. The BMA has put that forward to their members. So that was very interesting.
Now it's Jen Cope's take on the financial hardship facing the new British government. Finally, in Asia, foreign and defense ministers from the U.S. and Japan have met to discuss security cooperation. This follows an earlier meeting of top diplomats from Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, also known as the Quad. Beijing has reiterated its opposition to bloc confrontation and has urged the countries to stop interfering in China's internal affairs. Lin Jian is a spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
美日印澳四边机制
Quad keeps chanting the slogan of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and all the while it has been scaremongering, inciting antagonism and confrontation, and holding back other countries' development. This runs counter to the overwhelming trend of pursuing peace, development, cooperation, and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific, and will by no means gain any support.
Meantime, activists have gathered in central Tokyo to protest the two meetings, which they say could increase the possibility of war. Terence Terashima has more.
Tokyo hosted the U.S. Japan Security Consultative Committee called the 2+2 on Sunday. The Quad Foreign Ministers meeting was held on Monday, where foreign ministers from Australia, India, Japan and the U.S. discussed maritime security and initiatives to strengthen cyber defenses. In the 2+2, the U.S. announced plans for a major revamp of its military command in Japan to deepen coordination with the Japanese forces.
The United States will upgrade the U.S. Forces Japan to a joint force headquarters with expanded missions and operational responsibilities. Now, this will be the most significant change to U.S. Forces Japan since its creation, and one of the strongest improvements in our military ties with Japan in 70 years.
The U.S. Japan 2+2 meeting is being held in central Tokyo on Sunday, and not far from where the meeting is being held, activists marched to protest against the 2+2 under Quad, saying it is fueling tension in the region.
Activists said strengthening U.S.-Japan military ties will only accelerate the arms race and drive the country closer to war.
I think this agreement will eventually unify the U.S. military and the self-defense forces, strengthening their cooperation and unifying the chain of command, which clearly has China in mind and is posturing for war. I strongly object to this.
Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa said Quad is about protecting the foundations of prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region and achieving coexistence with the international community. But protesters said beefing up security pact will only fuel tensions in the region amid growing ongoing conflicts across the globe. Analysts say changes in the global security environment drove Quad to bolster the existing military pact.
U.S. and Japan's strategy for Asia, their attitude towards the Asian region, is the driving force behind Quad's change of direction. It's becoming more and more like an Asian version of NATO.
While both Japan and the U.S. are likely to see political leadership changes this year, activists fear that the current security-related trends might not change.
That was Terence Terashima in Japan. Now recapping today's headlines. Venezuela asks 7 of its neighbors, including Argentina and Chile, to withdraw diplomatic staff for alleged interference in its internal affairs. The Gaza ceasefire and hostage release negotiations have made little progress, with Israel and Hamas trading blame in the latest talks. And activists in Japan protest against the U.S. Japan 2+2 meeting and Quad meeting in Tokyo. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianlu. Thank you for listening.